Hello everyone, it's Elizabeth from the Smart Stitcher. In this week's tutorial we're going to be showing you how to create the sort of background template for a parabola flower. So this tutorial builds on the previous tutorials where we've looked at parabolas and we've sort of extended their sort of shapes a little bit more to create something that almost reminds me of a clematis, but maybe that's the colours I've chosen. So the first part is very much creating the template, and then the second part, which will be the next video, will be covering the stitching. If the idea of drawing something out to sort of create this fills you with dread, I have also put it as a PDF on my website, which is a free download, and you can then sort of use that to help you work out where everything needs to go, or if it's easier just work on top of it, and that's also fine too. So use it in the best way that helps you, but it is a handy guide to sort of show you where everything is going to be drawn out. So this tutorial we're going to be creating that grid, and then I'm going to be showing you how to draw that with a compass and a ruler, and then next tutorial will be actually onto the sewing, so you might want to have a think about the colours that you may wish to use. The first thing we're going to draw is just a line across our page. Now I've pressed a lot heavier with my pencil so that the camera can pick it up so I can show you what I'm doing, but please, when you're doing your drafting, make your pencil lines nice and light, or work on a tracing paper to create a pricking. So the first thing I'm going to do is just draw a line. It can go top to bottom, side to side. Mine's gone side to side. The first thing I'm going to do is draw my first inner circle, which is this sort of very small one here. I'm going to draw the circles out first, and then we're going to do this sort of dissection and divide the circles into 16 parts. Now one thing I find quite helpful to do, and I'll sort of make a note of this so that you can see on screen, is that I've drawn another line on a separate piece of paper where I'm sort of been working everything out, but I've then got the different radius that I'm going to be using so that I can then just adjust my compass really easily and sort of check for accuracy. So I've got that just to one side as well. So the first measurement is we're going to be setting our compass to a radius of 1.25 centimeters, which will give us a diameter of 2.5 centimeters. So I'm popping my pencil and my point in, and I'm just going to be drawing a circle around. Now I might need to press a little bit heavier so you can see it, but that's my first circle. So my next circle is going to have a radius of 2.3 centimeters, and that will start in exactly the same place, and we're just going to draw that one in. Again, I'm pressing slightly heavier to make sure that you can pick it up on the camera, but please just use a light pressure when you are doing your one. Our next radius is actually 4 centimeters, as we're sort of getting slightly bigger, and this will help us when we're sort of constructing our sort of grid for our stitches to sit on. So 4 centimeters is the next one. Then it's 5 centimeters, and then 6 centimeters. And then our final circle is actually going to be 9.2 centimeters in our radius. So that will be the last one that we draw here. So we've drawn out our circles that are going to help create our grid. We're now going to divide the circle into 16, and then I will show you how we then start to draw in our lines for our stitching guides. Now, if you're just using your compass to help divide up, then here's what we're going to do. I'm actually not going to work from my very outer circle because that's quite large. I'm actually going to come in a little bit, and I'm going to put the point of my compass on the next circle in where that circle meets the line, and I know that my line is going to be at the halfway point, so I'm going to set my compass just over the sort of that halfway point, and I'm going to create an arc, and then I'm going to come to the other end of the circle on the other side, and I'm going to create another arc, and the point at which those two arcs intersect is what I'm going to then join to the center of the circle to divide my circle into quarters. And it helps to make sure you've got the pencil point on the intersection exactly where you want that line to go. It just helps to line everything up. So I've now divided my circle into quarters. Obviously we've got a little way to go yet, and we're going to use that sort of principle to create, in effect we're going to be dividing each of these quarters into 4, but we're using the same principle with our compass. So I now know that I want to divide this upper quadrant into 4, but I know that my halfway point is going to be around here, so I'm going to pop my pencil over that sort of halfway point and I'm going to create an arc. And again, I'm using the same points before where I've put my pencil in, and I'm working from that same circle and I'm going to create my arc. So I've got another arc just here, and I'm then going to join that through the center of the circle, and I'm actually going to take the line all the way through. So now I've got my first one there, and then I'm going to repeat that process to create the lines in the other sections. So again, I've divided that in half, and then we're going to break that down a little bit further. So I'm making sure that everything is lined up, and now I'm going to break this one down into 4. So again, compass will go on that outer circle. I know that I need it to go just over the halfway point, so I'm going to make one arc there and another one there, and then I'm going to do the other 2 arcs for the other side, 1, 2, and we'll repeat that down here as well. But just to show you what that's going to look like, we will then have divided up our circle into 16. Now I'm hoping that you can see this and that it's light, not too light. So I'll just have a little check. Yep, that's coming out really nicely. So now to finish the arcs off, I'm going to just draw another one down here. And again, I want to make sure that my compass point is going into my paper at the same point, so that it's at the intersection of the line, so there's no risk of anything kind of sliding or slipping. Pencil on the intersection exactly where I want the line to be, and then we're driving through and drawing our line in. If at any point something doesn't look right or your pencil slips, just rub it out and make sure that you're happy with the lines that you've got there. So now we have our circle broken down into 16 parts. I'm going to just rub out some of my arcs because I don't want them then getting in the way of the next part. The next thing to do once we've drawn out our circles and our basic grid is to start to draw in our parabolas, and that's the next stage that I'm going to take you through now. I will be doing mine in a sort of coloured felt tip just so that the camera can pick them up and they're easy to distinguish, but of course do yours nice and light so that you can erase them really easily once we've punched the holes. So the good news is that with the filling in the circle here, we don't really need to do anything else to create those holes because they are already marked out by when we divided up our circle. So the first section we're going to draw is this sort of inner star shape. We'll just draft those out first of all. So we're going to be joining from the circle out to the next circle and then back down again. So it's going to look a little bit like this. So again, I'm just making sure my ruler and my intersections are nice and tight so that everything sits together, and we're going to work our way around the rest of the circle repeating this particular pattern. So our first section is now drawn in, and the next one that we're going to draw in is actually where we've got the pink and the green section. So we're going to be doing quite a deep parabola now, almost sort of out to our circle, penultimate circle layer. This time we'll be starting in a very similar spot, and I will be looking at that intersection. So we will have a few threads going through here, and I'm coming out to my penultimate layer, so not to the outer circle, to that sort of first layer back in. So in effect, this parabola is straddling are the very first one that we drew. So we're now just going to repeat that and create this sort of second layer for our template and draw that in. So we have then now drawn in our sort of quite a steep parabola, but quite effective as well. Actually just in the green, just gives it a slightly different sort of dimension. The next one we're going to do is the yellow layer, which I realised when I was looking at the template just now that I've actually missed off the template. I have now added it in, and we will be drawing that one on. So we're working from the outer tip of our parabola here, and we're coming into the, what's that, our sort of 1, 2, 3rd circle in. So we're just going to join up those sections now and make sure that their intersections are as accurate as we can possibly get them. And we're going to just repeat this all the way around. The next layer to do is the pink and purple parabolas on the outside here, and they are going to work from our outer circle into our layer number 4, and we're going to just draw those in now, and that is the last layer that we will be drawing in. As we are drawing them in, we're working out from the points that we have already got here. We're starting at layer number 4 and we're heading out to our outer layer. So it's going to start to look a little bit like what we have now. One of the things that you can find is, particularly if you're kind of concentrating really hard, is sometimes you can skip a layer. So if you realise that you might have taken a line to a wrong line, no trouble at all, just rub it out and put it back into the correct position. So we're now going to complete this outer layer, and then we're going to start thinking about our holes. So we've now drawn our final outer layer of our parabolas, and the next thing that we now need to do is to move on to mark in our stitches. And again, I would at this point as well, if I would probably be rubbing out some of the guidelines, so we don't necessarily need any of the divisions that we had from when we divided the circle earlier anymore. And I would at this point recommend trying to sort of just cut down on some of the pencil. The stitches that I'm using are going to be 0.5 centimeters apart, and we're going to be punching through on our inner circle, which is here, and we don't need to do anything for this inner circle because we've already got the intersections, and we're just going to punch a hole there. The very first layer that we drew is actually just going to be a straight stitch, so something a little different in the design, and we're not going to be punching sort of very small holes here to stitch that one, but we are going to be punching the rest of the lines that we've drawn in with our parabolas. So I've started to mark in the first holes that we're punching, and they are 0.5 centimeter apart. Now what you've got to make sure of is that you have the same amount of stitches on each arm, otherwise you're going to have kind of an odd unfinished shape. So when I'm counting, I tend to count the base, and then that's my number 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And then I'll do exactly the same on the other side, and they should both be even, which they are, which is good. So I've exaggerated mine slightly. I'm hoping that that's easy for you to see. Let me just zoom you in, there we go. So you can see that I've marked my stitches on. Mine are really obvious. For yours, I would recommend that you can make them really obvious, but I would just try and be discreet because they're easier to rub out. So I'm going to work my way around and mark the stitches onto the rest of this particular layer. When I'm marking the stitches out, I also find it handy to start from the same sort of base point. So if with this particular row here, I'm starting against that very first circle that I drew, and for each arm of my parabola I'm starting at the same point. So I'll always start here and finish at the outer edge do that as I work my way around, and that helps me to maintain some consistency, and that if there is an issue, or if I find that I have got a section whereby maybe I'm a little bit short, then any sort of errors will just be in the same place, so I don't have to worry about any unevenness or any other sort of problems with my stitching. So it will always look even if I have just sort of taken that care to make sure that I am doing the same thing consistently. And sometimes, you know, if it has gone slightly wrong, you've had the choice. You can rub it out. You can just by eye make some adjustments as well, so that you don't have to worry about sort of starting again, because there's nothing worse, because that destroys confidence if you've got to start again. So again, start at the base, always mark your stitches consistently in that way, and then if you see that one line is slightly longer or slightly shorter, you can adjust it just by eye as you go along. So I've marked out my first set of parabolas. I've gone all the way around. There are a few places where perhaps I'm not as accurate with my joins, so I've marked the stitch, but I've made a point that as long as when I prick it I can make it more accurate, that's absolutely fine. I've made my stitches a little bit bigger, and you'll notice at certain points they're really close together. And obviously when I come to prick that out, I must make sure that I am exactly on the line and I'm not necessarily sort of getting anything caught in the paper, because that, where it's a little bit thinner, it'll be vulnerable to sort of perforating and tearing, so we've got to be careful of that. We're now going to prick out the next row, and again I'm going to start from the base here. I'm going to work my way to the point, and then I'm going to also be counting to make sure that I've got an even number of stitches on both of my arms. Now I've just finished that particular row, and counting my top and bottom stitches as well, I've got 7 on each arm if I include the bottom where I started. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I've just got a slight sort of alteration near the top there, just to sort of factor that in and sort of get a nice even spacing. But we're now on to our final layer. So again, I'm going to be starting at the base, working my way up, and I'll be counting the stitches to make sure that each arm has the same amount on it. So I've just started to mark these out, and including the top and bottom, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I need to make sure that each of the arms has those 11 stitches as we go around. So we've now finished marking out our parabolas and where they're going to be going. This is the point where you may wish to rub out some lines. You may wish to get a cup of tea. If you are thinking you might like to use this design on other things, what you could do whilst you're pricking it is pop some tracing paper behind, so that when you prick the holes, you're sort of automatically creating a pricking as you go through onto your tracing paper. So we're going to be pricking out everywhere where we've marked our stitches, and including the intersections. And we're also going to be marking and punching where we're going to have our sort of straight lines towards this side here. So on the circle, I am going to be punching the holes around the circle, and I'm also punching the hole just at the tip of this very first triangle all the way around on those ones, but we're not going up the sides with those, we're going up the sides with our parabolas. You may also, after you've pricked out, may wish to do some rubbing out and get rid of the pencil lines. I've sort of gone fairly heavy with mine so that the camera will pick them up. And equally, when you're marking out your stitches, you may wish to be a little bit more discreet if you're not planning on rubbing out, because sometimes if you rub and you've got a really nice paper, the rubber can actually take away just a little bit of the top of the paper, which isn't very nice if you've got something good that you want to use. So we're now going to just take a moment to prick out all of our holes ready for sewing. So I've got just a cork, it's actually a placemat I'm going to prick onto. I've got a pin vise that's holding my embroidery needle, so I'm using an embroidery 7, sometimes I use an embroidery 5. It depends on the thickness of the thread that I'm using, so I'm using the finer needle today, the 7, because I'll be using a Gutermann's sewing thread to go through. As I'm going through, I want to sort of be quite sort of systematic, so I'm going to start in the center of my design with that inner circle, and I'm going to just work my way around, trying to be as accurate as I can with the intersection and make sure that I'm punching exactly on those lines. So I'm going to start off with that inner circle, and I'm then going to just punch the tips of those small triangles. If you don't have a pin vise, you can just maybe set the needle in a sort of bit of cork, like a bottle, top of a sherry bottle, or you can just hold it between your fingers and punch the paper. It may be worth just having a thimble on the end of the finger that's doing the sort of pushing, just as a little bit of protection, but there's various things you can do. You don't have to have a pin vise, so it's quite, use what's around you. Our next layer that we're going to do is I'm going to punch out our quite steep parabolas here, which are my green and sort of pink ones on this sort of completed one here, and then I will punch out the yellow layer, and then I'm going to punch out that final pink and purple layer. Sometimes what can happen, you might get a bit distracted if you're pricking, and it can be sort of a bit tricky sometimes to work out where you might need to come back to. It can help just to turn it over and have a look at the back. So I can see on my one that I need to focus on the outer edge here, and I've also got a few places where I seem to have just missed some of the inner lines as well, so I can very quickly just have a look at the back, check that out, and then flip it over and carry on piercing my holes. Sometimes something else that can happen is you might find that you just accidentally punch a hole away from the line where you want it to go. So you can just turn your page over, just check you know where that hole is, and you can just use your fingernail just to flatten the page from behind. If you've got a back of a spoon or a bone folder, you can just quickly cover that up, maybe put a little bit of tape on the back to support it, and then come back through round to the front and then punch the hole in the right place. So a little bit of tape on the back just helps to support it. It does happen to the best of us. I was doing this design as I'd sort of just stopped the camera, and then I was subject to feline invasion, so I had to kind of work around that in case anybody noticed the creases in my paper. That was because of the invasion. But we're now all ready for our sewing. Because I've got this as a teaching sample, I'm going to leave my pencil where it is, but you may wish to now just rub out any extra pencil lines that you don't want in the final piece. So join me in my next video where we're going to start stitching.